You want the truth? Fine. I worked on the Dyatlov Pass case. I saw what was out there, and it still haunts me every goddamn night. We weren't there to rescue anyone. We weren't there to investigate. We were sent to cover it up, to bury whatever tore those hikers apart. And before you ask, no, it wasn't the cold. It wasn't a panic. It wasn't an avalanche. It was something else, something that doesn't belong in this world. For us, the mission began in silence long before we ever touched the snow. I shouldn't even be saying this out loud, but if I don't, it stays locked in my head, and that's worse. Name, rank, unit, Sergeant Alexei Voronin, 2nd Guards Rifle Division, Winter Operations Detachment. Year, 1959. Location, Sverdlovsk, Soviet Union. Operation codename, Sever 9. We were 6 men selected for what they called a containment detail. The kind of job that doesn't go on the record, the kind you pretend never happened. Officially, they said a group of students had gone missing in the northern Urals, near a peak the locals called Kholat Syakhl, Dead Mountain. Unofficially, bodies had already been recovered, under circumstances so unclear they refused to put them in writing. Our task was blunt: secure the site, recover evidence, sanitize loose ends. The room where they briefed us was suffocating. Stale tobacco smoke hung heavy enough to sting the eyes. Coats still steamed from melted snow. The only light came from a single overhead lamp, its filament humming like an insect. The colonel's face was half in shadow, his eyes sharp but evasive, as though even speaking the orders out loud carried risk. The map he spread on the table looked standard at first glance: grids, ridgelines, marked valleys. But in the upper left corner, an entire square of terrain had been physically cut away. Not folded, not smudged, cut clean out, leaving a hole. I frowned and asked if there had been a printing error. The colonel's jaw locked. He tapped his finger firmly on the red circle over the pass. This is where you're going. Everything outside of it is not your concern. That was the only answer we got. The silence afterward carried more weight than words. They handed us our loadouts. Standard, on the surface, but overbuilt for what they described as a recovery mission. Mosin Nagant rifles with PU optics, Makarov sidearms. 2 DP-27 light machine guns were distributed between us. Flare pistols, bayonets, a single R105 radio with 1 spare battery, and only 1 Geiger counter, old, scratched, its dials half fogged. I remember staring at it longer than the rifles. If this was just a search and recover, why would we need anti-armor capability? Why radiation detection? The colonel gave no explanation. None of us pressed further. You don't when you know the answers aren't meant for you. He ran through the basics in a clipped monotone. Extreme weather, hostile terrain, possible animal interference, civilian casualties confirmed. His voice faltered on that last point. He cleared his throat, added, environmental factors likely contributed. It sounded like a line rehearsed, not believed. As we were filing out, the interpreter joined us, a Mansi tracker, old enough to be my father. His face was lined and scarred, his eyes sharp with the kind of knowledge you only get from years surviving in places men shouldn't. He walked close beside me. His breath carried the sharp tang of vodka and pine tar. Dead Mountain is not for men, he whispered. The hikers disturbed something. Do not stay long. Then he made the sign of the cross, quickly, as though he feared even being seen. He wasn't supposed to be Christian. That rattled me more than the words themselves. We signed the usual papers swearing the mission never happened. I'd done that before, but this time the air felt different, heavier. No jokes passed between us, no whispered bets about what we'd find, no banter. Even the younger privates stayed silent. The colonel didn't send us off with the usual patriotic lines. No for the motherland, no raised voices. He just stubbed his cigarette hard into the tray, muttered "contain it," and walked out, leaving us alone with the map full of holes. We sat there for a long moment, 6 men with orders, weapons, and more questions than answers. But in the Soviet army, questions were a luxury you didn't have. Looking back now, I realize none of us understood it at the time. The briefing itself was our first warning. We rolled out before dawn. Convoy was 3 Gaz-69 trucks, canvasbacks iced. Over. Engines grumbling against the cold. Our gear rattled inside, rifles slung, machine gun barrels wrapped in cloth to keep frost off. Comms checks came first, R105 radio pulsing with static, call signs confirmed in clipped tones. Then silence, except for the engines. The men tried to keep it light. Mikhail cracked jokes about vodka waiting for us back in Sverdlovsk. Petrov muttered about warm bread. Even Ivanov, who never smiled, hummed a marching tune under his breath. It felt routine, the kind of banter you cling to when you've done this too many times. Soldiers pretending the mission is just another long night in the field. But false comfort doesn't last. Halfway through the valley, the radio bled. Not interference, not static, words. One phrase, distorted. Turn back. The operator swore it was a bleed from a civilian band. But in the Urals, in that snow, who the hell was broadcasting? We stopped once in a village for fuel. The place was quiet, too quiet. Windows shuttered. No livestock in the pens. A single old woman watched us from her doorway, her eyes wide and hollow. She didn't wave, didn't move, just stared until we pulled away. The interpreter wouldn't meet our eyes. He just muttered, "They know." The climb grew worse. Roads narrowed, ice cracking under the truck tires. One engine coughed and died, frozen fuel line. We pushed the vehicle to the side, redistributed weapons in packs, and pressed forward on foot. Standard wedge formation, intervals 5 meters. Rifles. Ready. That's when my night scope flickered. Not dead batteries, just a sudden blink, like something had passed between the lens and the trees. I slapped it, it steadied. I told myself it was nothing. But at that moment, the air felt heavier. Too still. The kind of stillness that presses against your chest, like the mountain itself was waiting. We didn't talk much after that. Not because we were tired, but because the jokes had died. The banter was gone. Every man was listening to something in the snow. It was supposed to be routine, but we all felt something waiting for us. We left the last tree line midday. Snow glare was brutal, bouncing off the drifts until our eyes watered behind goggles. Every step crunched like glass underfoot. The interpreter muttered that the peak ahead, Kolatsiakol, meant mountain of the dead. He said it like he was spitting the words out. None of us responded. The wind carried his voice too far, making it sound like someone else was repeating him from the ridgeline. Formation was still disciplined, wedge spread 5-meter spacing. Ivanov on point, Petrov covering rear, Mikhail checking flanks. I stayed in the center with the radio, headset pressed to my ear. Static flared and dropped in bursts, a constant hiss that filled my skull. Routine, I told myself. Just another winter op. But even then, the confidence Wed carried from the convoy had already begun to erode. The first sign was the footprints. Half a kilometer before the pass, we found a trail crossing our route. Bare feet, adult-sized, deep enough to suggest weight. But there were no entry or exit points, just a line of prints that began in the open and ended in the open, like something had appeared, walked 20 paces, and disappeared again. We measured stride spacing, consistent, calculated, almost like a drill march. But in that weather, with -25 winds and snow crust hard as stone, no one should have been walking barefoot. Not there, not then. We took photos, logged coordinates, but the men exchanged looks that didn't need words. I could feel the shift, every man recalculating, trying to fit what Wed'd seen into doctrine, and failing. The second sign was the air. It changed as we climbed. The temperature dropped suddenly, 15 degrees in less than a kilometer. My breath crystallized against my scarf instantly, freezing the fabric until it cracked when I moved my jaw. Then came the smell, sharp, acrid, metallic, like burned wires or blood left too long in the cold. I checked the Geiger counter, needle spiked, twitched, then fell back to 0. Faulty equipment maybe, or maybe not. Mikhail coughed hard, doubled over, spat into the snow. His spit hissed faintly, as though the ground had heat beneath the crust. He swore under his breath and muttered prayers between coughs. Nobody laughed. Then the comms started bleeding again. At first faint whispers like interference, then actual words, here, repeated twice in Russian but not in any voice we recognized. The operator swore he hadn't keyed the mic. I tapped the handset, switched frequencies and reset again. Nothing but dead static. We pushed forward anyway. Orders don't bend for superstition. By late afternoon, we reached a stand of rock outcroppings, jagged like broken teeth rising out of the snow. We stopped to catch breath and sweep. That's where we found the carvings. Not fresh, not Soviet. Etched into the stone so deep it looked burned in. Spirals, crooked shapes that bent into themselves. Patterns that seemed to twist if you stared too long. My head ached just looking. The interpreter froze, wouldn't translate, just shook his head slowly and whispered, not words, warnings. He lowered his gaze immediately, like even acknowledging them was dangerous. Petrov brushed one carving with his glove, tried to laugh it off, called it primitive graffiti. His voice cracked halfway through. Nobody joined him. We bivouacked in the rocks, setting perimeter with trip flares and mines. Standard layout, but the quiet was wrong. No bird calls, no wind through the peaks. Not even the groan of ice shifting. A silence so heavy it pressed against the eardrum. I felt staged, manufactured, like the world was holding its breath. That night, on the second watch, Vasin shook me awake. His face was pale, his breath ragged clouds in the air. He pointed toward the ridge. Bones. At first I thought it was just driftwood scattered across the snow. But no. Ribs, long bones, skulls, not. Human. Deer, maybe elk, but arranged. Laid in a spiral, ribs pointing inward. Skulls cracked cleanly open. Not gnawed. Not shattered. Split. Like someone had set them down that way, piece by piece, with ritual precision. We didn't log it. Didn't photograph it. Some things you don't want in a report. Mikhail muttered, "This is wrong." Ivanov barked at him to shut his mouth, to hold discipline. But even Ivanov's hands trembled when he lit his cigarette, flame shaking in the still air. The glow lit his face in brief flashes, jaw clenched too tight, eyes scanning shadows that shouldn't have been moving. I tried to rationalize it all. Told myself it was weather distortion, tricks of light on the snow, erosion on the rocks. The silence is just altitude messing with my ears. I tried, but deep down, every nerve in me knew we were losing control of the ground before Wed even reached the site. We brushed it off as nerves. That was our mistake. The fourth night was when the mission stopped being ours. We were dug in along the ridge overlooking the valley where the hiker's tent had been found. From a distance, it was just a depression in the snow, but every man in the line felt it like a scar on the mountain. The wind had died completely, unnaturally still. The kind of stillness you don't get in the Urals, not at that altitude, not in winter. But the temperature plunged lower than our gauges would even register. I remember flexing my fingers inside my gloves and not feeling them at all, the leather stiff as wood. The silence pressed on us like a weight. Formation was set. Ivanov and Mikhail on the northern flank, Petrov with the DP-27 at Overwatch, me with the radio in center. Trip flares strung in staggered intervals, fallback lines marked by chalk on the rocks. Routine, disciplined, exactly the kind of setup that keeps men sane when the unknown is close. And then the sound began. At first it was faint, a low hum bleeding through the R105 handset. I thought it was bleed over, atmospheric interference. I tapped the casing, adjusted the gain, checked the antenna, no improvement. Then words began to emerge, distorted, familiar but wrong. It was my own voice, my own transmissions from earlier in the day, played back in fragments, broken by static. Advance wedge check spacing maintained comms, over and over. Like the mountain was feeding my words back to me, chewing them into something hollow. Mikhail swore and pulled his scarf tighter. It's interference, I told him. But even I didn't believe it. Minutes later came the boots. Clear as anything, crunch, 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 snow packed underfoot. South side of the perimeter. Every man froze. We snapped rifles toward the sound. NV scopes up, barrels steady. Nothing. No heat, no silhouette. Just the steady rhythm of footsteps circling us in the dark. Perfect cadence, one step after another, deliberate. The interpreter broke discipline first. He pressed his palms over his ears and muttered, "They're here, they're here." His voice cracked like a boy's. I grabbed his arm, demanded a translation. He looked at me with tears frozen to his cheeks and said, "Not men. Not spirits either. Something older." Then he pulled away, crouched against the rocks, rocking like a child. Ivanov barked orders, tightened formation, and fields of fire overlapping. We overcompensated, rifles jittering, safeties off. Men muttered into their scarves, voices too low to be called chatter. Fear had entered the formation, and fear spread faster than frostbite. Then the visual hit. A flare popped southeast, casting red across the snow. The light caught on nothing and then on something. Shadows moved, long, angular, bent at impossible angles, stretching against the wrong direction of light, as if the figures weren't on the ground but projected onto it. I raised my scope. For a second, I saw a shape at the tree line. Tall, still, no face, no features, just absence cut out of the world. When I lowered the scope, it was gone. Petrov whispered, "They are surrounding us." Nobody corrected him. Nobody dared. The radio bled again. Not my voice this time. A chorus of whispers, layered, impossible to distinguish. Words in Russian, yes, but drowned in something else, something behind the language. Then, clear as a bell through the static, under snow. The same phrase Wed heard days before. The interpreter screamed. Not words, just raw terror. He bolted toward the rocks before Ivanov tackled him down. His face pressed into the snow, he sobbed, "You don't understand. You woke it. It knows we're here." I wanted to say he was delirious. Exposure, stress, paranoia. The kind of things men break down with when the cold eats at their nerves. But my nightscope flickered again, lens going black for half a second. And in that instant of blindness, I felt something lean close behind me. Warm breath against frozen air. A presence where no one stood. I spun, rifle raised. Nothing. Only snow. The hum deepened, spreading through the rock under us. Not sound, vibration. The kind that rattles your teeth and makes your chest cavity feel hollow. Men shifted nervously, boots crunching too loud. Every motion seemed amplified, like the silence was recording us. We held positions until dawn, but discipline had shattered. Men whispered instead of reporting. Fingers twitched on triggers, safeties off. Ivanov's voice cracked when he tried to steady us. Petrov fired a short burst into the snow just to break the quiet, then cursed himself under his breath. The air itself felt thicker, harder to draw into the lungs. Every exhale steamed white and seemed to hang too long, curling, twisting, as if something invisible was studying it. That was when I stopped believing this was just another mission. The mountain had taken control. We were no longer operators executing a task. We were intruders on ground that didn't belong to us. We thought Wed'd seen the worst. We hadn't. The fifth night, we lost control. It started with the snow itself, drifts that had lain. Still all day began to shift, small ripples at first, then pulses, like something was crawling beneath. I ordered flares. 2 popped off, white arcs across the valley, and that's when it stepped out. From the tree line, a figure emerged, tall, elongated, body bent at angles the human frame can't hold. Eyes glowed faintly, not light but reflection, like ice catching a hidden sun. It moved slowly, deliberately, every stride silent in knee-deep snow. Ivanov barked, 2 o'clock, engage! Petrov opened with the DP-27 controlled bursts. Tracers cut across the dark, kicking up snow and bark. The thing didn't react. Rounds passed through like smoke. Mikhail panicked, pulled a grenade, yanked the pin, and threw. An explosion rocked the valley, a shockwave thumping my chest. When the snow cleared, the figure was still there, closer, unmarked. Then the radios cut. Not static, not silence. Our own voices, all of them, talking at once. Fragments of orders, prayers, screams, like every sound we had made since arriving was being replayed back to us. It drowned us. Night vision failed next. Scopes flickered black, lenses whitening with static like frost. Through mine, I saw 3 shapes. No, 4. Then 1. They didn't hold form. Vasin swore it was a man. Mikhail cried it was a beast, something with horns. I saw hollow sockets staring straight at me. We weren't even seeing the same thing. Panic shredded cohesion. Ivanov tried to hold formation, shouting flank left, suppressive fire. His voice cracked halfway through. We moved, but movement meant nothing. Every angle we covered, the entity or entities were already there, shifting, surrounding. I tried to stay tactical, logged in my head, 2 o'clock flank compromised, south line open, fallback path west. I raised my rifle, fired in 3-round bursts, disciplined and measured. Every shot passed through. No impact, no blood, nothing. Then came the attack. Vesin screamed first. He was lifted off his feet, not by hands, not by claws, just pulled upward, chest first, like strings yanking his ribs. His scream cut off when his sternum collapsed inward with a sickening crack. He dropped, body twisted, mouth frozen in silence. Petrov swung the DP-27 wildly, tracers ripping circles into the storm. He shouted over the gunfire, "It's not dying! It's not!" And then his voice just stopped, not faded, stopped. He was still firing, still moving, but his voice was gone, like his throat had been erased. Mikhail fell to his knees, hands over ears, sobbing, "Make it stop, make it stop." His helmet vibrated like something inside was pounding to get out. He slammed his head into the ice until the steel dented. I wanted to pull him back. I couldn't move. My body locked from cold and terror. The interpreter crawled past me, eyes wide, face pale. He whispered, "It's the mountain. It's alive." Then he vanished into the snow. No footprints, no trace, just gone. The ground beneath us convulsed. Snow rippled outward like waves. I realized then we weren't standing on land at all. Or at least, not only land. Something beneath us was awake. We poured fire into it anyway. Rifles, machine guns, flares, grenades. Discipline broken, every man dumping rounds until chambers clicked empty. The mountain swallowed it all. The only sound left was our breathing, ragged and shallow. And through it, the figure, or figures, advanced, unhurried, untouchable. In that breath, I knew Wed crossed into something we couldn't fight. The firefight didn't end so much as dissolve. One moment we were unloading everything, rifles, DP-27, grenades screaming over the chaos. The next, it was gone. No figures, no hum, just silence. Not the silence of a ceasefire, not the silence of a snow-covered valley. It was absolute. A silence that pressed inside your skull, making your own heartbeat sound like artillery. Ivanov gave the retreat order. Standard fallback, west slope, bounding overwatch, 5-meter spacing. On paper, it should have been clean. In reality, it was chaos. Petrov covered with the machine gun but kept swinging arcs into empty snow, tracers cutting through men's fields. Friendly fire risk was seconds away. I grabbed his shoulder, shoved him down the slope, yelled in his ear. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he couldn't. His eyes were wide, glassy, mouth moving with no sound coming out. He was firing blind because he had nothing else left to do. Mikhail stumbled past me, helmet cracked, blood frozen to his temple. He wasn't holding his rifle anymore. Just the pin of a grenade clutched in his fist like a talisman. I pried it out of his hand before he killed us all. He looked at me like I'd stolen his only chance to survive. Vasin, what was left of him, was unrecognizable. Chest collapsed inward, spine bent the wrong way. We left him there. Not out of choice, but because no one could carry a body that broke in that terrain. We broke formation, men scattering downslope in half-panicked retreats. Radio was gone, just loops of static and echoes of our own voices, delayed like we were talking into a cave. GPS logs froze, coordinates stuck at 0. Every time I looked at the display, it blinked nonsense. At some point, the wind came back. Snow whipped across our goggles, stinging, but it felt almost like a mercy. Noise again, movement again, proof we were still in the world. By dawn, only 4 of us remained. Petrov with the machine gun, still trembling. Mikhail silent, head bandaged, eyes hollow. Ivanov trying to hold command, voice hoarse, discipline hanging by threads, and me dragging the radio set that no longer mattered. We made it back to extraction. The pilot didn't ask questions, just looked at us once, then stared ahead as if he'd seen this before. The debrief was worse than the mission. They separated us into bare rooms, 1 lamp, 1 officer with a tape recorder. We gave our testimonies, word-for-word accounts of the things we saw. Every time I spoke of the figures, of the pressure, of the silence, the officer's pen slowed, then stopped. Head stare at me a long time, then write something else entirely. When I asked about the bodies, about Vasyl, about the interpreter, they told me no such men were on my roster. When I mentioned Petrov's muteness, they said he was recovering fine in a separate facility. We were made to sign papers swearing the cause of death, exposure, hypothermia, panic. Nothing else. No mention of weapons fired. No mention of Geiger spikes. No mention of footprints that began and ended in open snow. They confiscated our gear. Rifles, machine guns, even my compass. They pulled the film from the cameras, stripped the logbooks, and seized the GPS. When I asked about retrieving the corrupted radio tapes, the colonel leaned across the desk and said flatly, "There are no tapes." His eyes told me the rest. You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. For your career, for your family, for your life. Mikhail broke first. He muttered in the debrief that the mountain was alive. They took him away mid-sentence. I never saw him again. Petrov never spoke again. He sat in the barracks with his hands trembling, staring at the floor. 2 weeks later, I heard he died of pneumonia. Ivanov survived, but he changed. Hard man, once unshakable. After the pass, he jumped into the shadows. He never gave orders the same way again. As for me, I signed the papers, wrote the words they wanted, buried the truth under black ink and sealed envelopes. But I knew, we all knew, something had been erased. Not just from our files, but from history itself. And the worst part? That silence on the mountain, it never left me. I hear it still, in rooms like this, between questions. A silence that listens back. The cover-up was worse than the mission itself. I can't tell you why I'm speaking now. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's because I know my time's running out, and silence won't save me anymore. I tried to bury it. I tried to tell myself the mountain stayed behind us, sealed in the snow, locked in reports no one would ever read, but it didn't. It followed. Sometimes it's in the static when I switch the radio on, even when the set isn't connected. Sometimes it's in the frost patterns on my window, shapes too deliberate to be chance. And sometimes I feel it behind me when the world goes quiet, the air pressing in the same way it did up there. They told us the file was sealed, but sealed things don't stay buried forever.